Hello, welcome everybody. All right, another episode, another day, another conversation. And if this is your first, your second, or you've been tuning in to every single episode, thank you. Yeah, it's a great honor, a joy, and a pleasure to host Blaine Andrusek, Blaine the Herb Man.
And I'm thrilled doing it. I've been stuck in isolation for 3 years now, and I love to talk. and, um, if people say, "Oh, I think you're being a little verbose," I have to just say, "Well, I'm surprised it took you so long to bring that up." And when I'm doing a longer class at all, something like Herb 1 or whatever, I always ask, has everybody here been fishing at least once? And most of the group will, yeah, nod. And I said, well, you cast out your lure and then you have to reel it in. So if you ever realize that I've gone so off on a tangent and led to a tangent, and I'm not even remotely talking about what I'm supposed to be anymore, that's how you give me the sign. You don't have to say anything, just give me the reel it in sign.
Yeah.
And that'll get me back on board. So I'm kind of known for that. But
Yeah, well, I think that's what makes these, these interesting, and why people have been so drawn to you over the years to learn from you, to spend time with you, be in your presence. Is the stories and the trails of, yeah, you can go this way and that way.
well, apart from growing up, spending all my summers up at Waskesiu Lake in the Prince Albert National Park, and helping my mother with gardens and just house plants and things, I used to find it very odd as a child that she would talk sometimes to her plants as she was watering them.
Right.
I thought that was a little weird, and that if they ever started talking back, one of us should go to a hospital or something. But all these years later, learning a bit about plant spirit communication,
Yeah.
she was doing something there that she never did explain it or have to account for it or anything, but I would just sit there and watch and pick it up. But anyway, um, I was a very frustrated young man at 18, and working for a living in the big city wasn't making sense. And one night I just got really frustrated and wanted to run away from the world, and I knew I couldn't do it where I was right then. It took me a couple of months to get organized, but my first big trip started at minus 27 in 4.5 feet of snow. It was
Wow.
record snows that year. And my older brother towed me in some gear in a 14-foot canoe I had done my best to find a place where there would be nothing. Actually, the government people were confused because they said, well, why do you want to go there? There's nothing up there. And I was just,
Exactly.
it's exactly what I want. I could see that the nearest road would be no more than a 2-day hike out if anything ever went wrong.
Wow.
And in the end, my mother insisted on getting a VHF radio from the government. They rent them. And they said, everything's in the box. It's all you'll need. It's all their instructions. Right. So I didn't open the box until I was up there.
Yeah.
And I opened the box, and there's this big coil of wire and some instructions on how to put the antenna up. And I looked around at the trees. There's no way I'm going to get this up. So it was very fortunate that a couple of wardens came in not long after I was there just to see. They'd heard I was going up there, and they came in to meet me and see what the heck I was doing, and they helped me get that up. So we just agreed. I don't think I even had a watch. We just agreed that at sundown, every second day or something like that, we'd have a grid set up where I would just hello, goodbye. And so there was always that as backup if I ever did need it. But
your lifeline.
I was otherwise off grid.
Yeah.
And certainly had brought some candles and a few things like that to work with. I wasn't doing some of the stuff that I see on that Alone show where they're taking some reindeer moss and sticking it in with some pine pitch and making a little. You could almost cook on that, actually.
Right.
But a little more conventional than that. But anyway, that trip was a little over 4 months, and I was alone there in the woods and had a lot of time to think about things and just look at things. And that's when I started, once spring came, to experiment with the wild plants. And I had a few guides I'd taken with me. Some of the early books were really bad.
Right.
We have some great books now,
Oh, I really do.
and with good photographs and all of that. But back then, you'd have these sketchy line drawings, and a lot of the books were done by and for Americans. So there's no wild grapes in northern Saskatchewan kind of thing, so a lot of the book wouldn't be useful at all, but it'd get you in the mood for things. Again, in the Boreal forest, there's no wild asparagus either, which you and I both enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it grows in the city here, but there's a lot of things in the foothills that aren't in the Boreal.
Yeah.
And yet, when I got to France, the forest was almost the same.
Right.
Like I always like to say, if you do a really long walk that way, then you have an equally long swim. You end up in the foothills of the Alps, and you're at the same latitude.
Right.
And a lot of the plants that grow right here grow in Europe. So when I finally got, after my career was well underway doing herb walks and such, about the time I met you, I realized I could go to France next week and do a professional herb walk.
Right.
Because
Cool.
the only things that were new to me were olive trees and walnuts and things
Yeah.
that grow because of the warmer climate, right? But otherwise, same stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of the herbs that we teach in classes here were well used in Europe first, and a lot of them were used by our Aboriginal people here. So I always liked the approach that I was taught initially, that it doesn't make sense to just what we see locally. Let's involve at least the roots of some Chinese herbs and some East Indian herbs, and certainly the European history.
Yeah.
And we cover a lot of ground in some of those courses. So I don't claim, because I'm not trained to be an Ayurvedic practitioner, or I'm certainly not a Chinese doctor, but over the years I've learned quite a few of the basics.
Yeah.
Quite often from some of those practitioners coming and taking classes from me and learning a few tricks along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a lot of teaching at massage therapy schools as well,
Great.
where maybe in second year of the longer courses, the students get me for a whole week to learn about essential oils.
Mm-hmm.
And I would learn a few little massage tricks while I was there,
Yeah.
and that have come in handy since. But so anyway, I feel quite rounded, and may not be an expert in anything. It's such a vast field, working with wild plants, that after all these years, over 40 years of working with them, I still feel like I know about this much, because there's just so much to know.
Yeah.
And every time I meet somebody else, there was you brought up Yarrow. We may have mentioned Yarrow Willard, and some of you might know him well, but I met Yarrow when he was still inside his mother's belly, because his mother, Dorothy, is a very dear friend of mine. We've been together apparently even in past lifetimes.
Wow.
I guess we did Atlantis together, if you believe in such things. But you get these life channel readers that come around,
Right, yeah.
And so we're like soulmates. We go so far back, and we're in constant touch. But anyway, so Terry Willard had started the college, and him and Dorothy were just roommates for a while, with a whole house full of people that was sharing a place. And she called me one day and said, "Hey, you better come over. I've kind of hooked up with one of my roommates, and you better come and meet this guy, because I think I'm going to marry him." And I said, okay. So we arranged dinner the following week, and I was just ready to quit everything I was doing and go back to school. And truthfully, it would have been medical school.
Right.
And I had questions of Terry, and it was like the answers were painted in the sky or something. And so I started studying herbology with Wild Rose College.
Cool.
Now, when Yarrow came along, I have so much respect for Yarrow, because a lot of sons will take over their father's businesses, whether it's a garage or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But when Yarrow got away from home, he left, although a lot of it would have been intrinsic just from growing up around that atmosphere, but he kind of started doing his own thing.
It's true, yeah.
He didn't just take over Wild Rose College.
Yeah.
In fact, he didn't want to have anything to do with the college initially. And he struck out and did his own thing with his own formulas, and getting more involved with the mushrooms,
Yeah.
things like that. And I'm so proud of him for doing it that way, his own thing,
Yeah.
and slowly drifting back
Right.
to his roots, right?
Yeah.
And keeping the college afloat now that his dad is retired, or trying to be. Like with all of the involvement Terry has, I mean, it's almost impossible to retire.
Yeah.
And I'm really enjoying, just from doing this, I'm getting a few emails again and answering clients' problems. The woman that we talked about ADHD for last
That's right.
adventure,
Yeah.
she emailed me thanking us profusely. So it's like big hugs and everything to you. I have to share this with you. And she was really hoping she'll make it out to the event on Sunday so she can meet us both. She'll
Awesome.
probably kiss our feet, you know.
Right. Yeah,
she just
yeah.
thinks we're heroes. So,
And I'll just kind of throw in a little thing there. So that is coming up Sunday, June 25th of 2023, because who knows when you're going to be watching this or listening to it. And it won't be the last one, right? So yes, love to see you come out to that event, you know, connect with Blaine in person, and I'm sure there'll be more in future. So if you're kind of watching or listening to this at a later date, check out lightseller.ca live events, and there might just be something featuring Blaine.
Malcolm brings in all sorts of guest speakers, so you can learn everything from how to make chocolate to how to make sauerkraut to keep up to date on all of the data. Nutritional information changes so fast
Yeah.
that after not being into the books for a few years, I feel completely out of date.
Right.
Like if I...
And yet there are still like foundational principles.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
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 So I would have lots to share with a newcomer, but I doubt that I will ever put myself out there as a practitioner again,
Right.
seeing actual patients and getting paid for it.
Yeah.
But I can coach people a lot.
Right.
And
Yeah, and you mentioned Yarrow. That was another thing I remember in those early days of him leaving home, making his way. He did a little bit as a kind of practitioner consultant, but I remember him saying specifically, he's like, I think I might leave that till I'm a little bit older, right? Kind of early 20s. And though he had tremendous amount of knowledge, like you say, just growing up in that household with who his parents were and everybody that he was around, and he was certainly qualified enough to do it, he felt, I need a little bit more life experience and a little bit more kind of, herbal foundation in order to take on that role of practitioner.
there's so much to know, and a lot of people never get the confidence
Yeah,
to hang a shingle.
right.
And as a teacher over the years, it's been frustrating that some of my very best students never go on to use the information. Some of them end up working in a health food store for very little pay, and at least they're doing something with it to keep their brains active. Some of them are just going to use the information to take care of their own family. That's okay. But some of the people that were my worst students are the first ones to hang a shingle, which is really frustrating because they're out there misinforming their client patients, and that gives all of us a bad name,
Yeah.
And so the best people that end up not practicing makes me want to cry, and then the worst people that are practicing and shouldn't be, I want to go out and hit them with a stick, kind of thing. And it's
Well, as you know, there's so much more to just the herbal knowledge, right? You got to know how to run a business, which includes, how do you put yourself out there and market, and how do you structure, and you got to have a good relationship with money, and all that stuff. It takes a lot to be
people
able to
used to call the college asking, maybe their daughter wants to come to Wild Rose College and daddy's going to pay for it, and he's looking at the big meal deal. It's going to cost about 20 grand, and they're like, can you actually make a living doing this?
Right.
There'd be all these questions, and the receptionists there didn't have the answers, so quite often it was my numbers that they'd give to people.
Right.
And I would have to coach the parents and say, well, there's no guarantees here. It's not like if you go to nursing school and become, let's say, an RN, you can travel all over the world and that degree is recognized, right? Where when you study as a herbalist, that just doesn't happen. You have to make your own path.
Yeah, yeah.
So like you said, you've got to have good people skills, and unless you're doing enough work to actually hire a bookkeeper and do taxes and all of that kind of stuff, they're not going to teach you all of that in a herbal school.
Yeah.
Typically. So
Well, I always share with people the advice that you gave me, and I think it was to me specifically, but it applies, very generally, and I absolutely love it, and I share it all the time because a lot of who I speak to, I'm not speaking to herbalists, in that sense. Like I have a lot of relationships with herbalists, but in terms of, who I'm able to impart, wisdom and insight to, I can in regards to business and speaking and money management and all that stuff. Like I take that role on, and I've created a Business for Herbalists course through Wild Rose College. That's
Oh, good.
something, yeah, it's recent. That came out just in this last year, and I'm, yeah, really happy with that, proud of that.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like, okay, that's something I can provide to the herbal community, but otherwise, like, I'm just a herbal student, in that sense, and I don't ever intend personally to be a practitioner. That's just not who I am. It's not my role. I learn this for myself, and I learn it to share with others that are what I would describe as just their own herbalist, the home
Sure.
herbalist, right? Like you say, just for themselves, their family. That's who I want to work with and inspire on that path. And I remember you sharing very specifically, you says, Malcolm, think about that word, herbal practice. Herbal practitioner. It is a practice, right? You got to practice it. You got to practice picking. You got to practice making. You got to practice like dosing. Like
Get your fingers dirty,
yeah,
whether it's with dirt or with blood.
right.
And we all go a slightly different route with, like, give me a severed limb, give me a real pneumonia.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a hardcore guy doing ditch medicine kind of thing. I think there's a book called that.
Right.
And I really enjoyed doing the Red Cross, whatever they call it, their version of alternative first aid. And at one point when I was doing classes with the city, they changed their requirements and you had to do that course.
Right.
And it was really funny because I had a rough idea what I was getting into, and I had all sorts of things stuffed up my shirt sleeves and whatever, like gloves, latex gloves, things like that. And our instructor had come from Australia, wonderful man. I'm forgetting his name just now, but he was very fun to be with and a great makeup artist.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that the class worked was it's a 2-weekend thing. Well, no, there were several nights in class, and then we had, I think, 2 weekends in the field. And the group was split in two, and you would take turns where half the group would be the actors, and half the group were the hands-on, how do we fix this? So half the group would have to go hide out of earshot, and then he'd say, I'll give you a signal. So he'd fire a bear banger,
Right.
and we all come running around the corner, and what's happened is a camp stove has blown up.
Right.
And so there's people with pieces of metal stuck in their head and somebody else laying down with a black face. And so how do we deal with this, right?
Yeah.
And they were just such great classes.
Yeah.
Like learning how to make, I think at one point, what had happened to me? Yeah, I slipped on a hillside and broke a leg.
Right.
And they had to get me off this hillside somehow. And how do we do that with what we've got here and that sort of thing. But anyway, at the very start of the class, we didn't even realize what was happening. And one of the group everybody was standing around still with their coffees in their hands and having a pee before we went out on this hike. And one of the women came walking around the corner of the bathroom, and she'd somehow slit herself, and there was blood all over the place. And I just did a quick scan of the ground and saw some yarrow over there, put on a latex glove, and went and crushed some yarrow up and grabbed her hand and was compressing yarrow over the blood. And of course the bleeding stopped right away. And the instructor went, "What the heck are you doing there, buddy?" So every single thing that came up on that class, I had something in the forest to use.
Right.
And
Yeah.
by the end of the class, he hired me
Oh, fun.
to teach. Like he had the whole for Europeans and Asian people and stuff coming into K country, he had the contracts for that all signed up. Whether it was rafting or cycling or just hiking, whatever. And so every spring I would come in and take his instructors, or guides I should call them,
Right.
for a herb walk, and
Right.
tell them lots of stories they could repeat to the guests, as well as I've always said, an EMS vehicle has a lot of things I don't have, but I've got things they don't have, and we all need to work together. So anyway, it was really, really delightful. I'd recommend that course to anybody because it's a lot of fun, and even just our acting skills, like bringing up real tears.
Right.
And one of the things somebody had a poisonous mushroom, so chewing on some dry oatmeal and working that around for a while with a little bit of water makes great fake puke.
Right.
So so you're over there rolling around on the ground with a sore belly and you're puking up all this oatmeal. And what do we do with somebody like that? And so that's a great course to take.
Yeah.
And then we kind of ran short on something last event where somebody had asked, well, where do I go with botany and how do you start and why is everything in Latin and all of that? So the reason that Linnaeus chose Latin was that it's a dead language. Nobody speaks Latin anymore. Certainly a lot of religious writing, all of the old historical books all over the world are done in Latin. And it's because it's dead, where English is one of the worst languages in the world for slanging things. And I like to use the word down, for example. So you can fall down, you can be feeling down, or you can say, hey, look at my new down jacket. Or somebody turns on their stereo and says, hey, let's get down to that. Or duck, because the sky is falling down. We use that word so many ways that for someone from another part of the world to try and figure out what that word means in English is really tough.
Yeah.
But Latin words mean one thing. Arvensis means of the field, period. That's it. That's all it means.
Yeah.
There's no slanging it. It doesn't matter if there's a horse in the field or not. It means of the field, period. Done. So that's why Latin was chosen, is it's used all over the world today, and it's a dead language. There's no second hidden meanings.
Right. Very interesting.
Now, we had a fellow named Tom Elpel come up when I was getting some of these outdoor programs together for Wild Rose, and he wrote a book that he won a lot of awards for called Botany in a Day, which is impossible. I think he should have called it Botany in a Month or something like that. But he took Linnaeus based all of his arranging on the morphology of the plants. So morphology means what things look like. And so all of the plants that have cross-shaped flowers are put into a category called crucifera because they have cross-shaped flowers. And then you go from there with the leaves and the stems and all the other stuff, right? So there's a lot of plants that whatever flowers do, whatever their arrangement is before you put them in a vase is called an inflorescence, same spelling as light bulbs. And some of them might have a stalk with a whole bunch of little stalks with the flowers on them. That's called a raceme. But if the word for no little stalks is sessile because the little stalks ceased to exist, so you have other flowers like lavender, frankly, where each little flower is attached directly to that main stalk.
Right.
So that's called a spike. Right? So there's all these new words that you have to learn. But it was all based on the morphology.
Right.
Now, I'm really glad that I'm not teaching botany anymore, because the crap hit the fan a few years ago where all of a sudden we got DNA involved.
Right.
And so a whole lot of plants are being reclassified.
Oh.
And everything that I learned and all of the botanical keys and stuff that I've used my whole career aren't up to par anymore, because DNA is saying, well, you're actually not cousins at all just because you have cross-shaped flowers.
Right.
And so DNA is taking us in a different direction.
Yeah.
And a lot of botanical keys are going to have to be, well, are being rewritten.
Yeah.
So they'll still be Latin names,
Right.
but they're who are your cousins part is
Yeah.
all getting changed.
Yeah, it's off. You'll see that, new names. Not so much in the books. I mean, depending on how recent, but yeah, if you look up on websites, previously known as is now has this name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I wanted to touch upon this idea of we talked about, we've got an audience that's quite a wide spectrum. People that are just interested in herbs, people that are studying to be professional herbologists, and I think this applies to everybody across the board. And I love you sharing that story around wilderness survival, just as one example of I think this is just like foundational like life skills, life training that we should all have. And in this day and age, that generally comes more formally. Okay, I'm going to sign up for this course and do this. But once upon a time, I mean, even the type of life that you had described, shifting into as a young man and probably growing up, there were a lot of things that you were just naturally exposed to that the average.
I didn't understand working for a living, but when you go in the woods alone, you either freeze to death starving in the dark, or you get up and chop wood and haul water.
Yeah.
Work, live, work, live. Oh, working for a living. I think I'm
Right.
getting it now. I have to get out of bed, go hunt something, bring it back and cook it.
Yeah.
Catch a fish, pull some bark, pick some flowers. You have to hunt. Being a hunter-gatherer is a full-time job.
Yeah.
And that's why it would be really tough to make it long-term on your own, or even as a couple.
Yeah.
So hunter-gatherer societies formed because there's times when some of the berries, for example, might come into season. They're all ripe at the same time. You either pick all you can this week, or you don't see them till next year.
Right.
So everybody drops what they're doing to go pick those berries, and then we dry them or make pemmicans or whatever with them. Right?
Yeah.
So now here we are with cities of 1 million people or more.
Right. Yeah. I remember there was a quote from a film I watched years and years and years ago. I don't even know the film or the context, but this one quote stuck out so much. It was about this, father who was trying to, make his own way back to land, that kind of a thing. And he says, having a job is expensive because you gotta, pay for, somebody else to do all the things you don't have time to do, or buy the things that you don't have time to do yourself, make yourself. Yeah. How do we find that middle ground? Like all the way from, like you say, a city of 1 million people where we have, what's been described as this kind of laptop class, society that I'm not saying they're not. I mean, there's a spectrum. There's people that do a lot of valuable work on a laptop, and there's a lot of people that, do we really need that? Like there's a lot of, I don't want to put a name to it, but how do we find our way back to engaging in meaningful work and picking up like essential life skills? Like most people, myself included, grew up, totally. I had a great connection to nature growing up, so I feel very grateful for that. But not a lot of natural inherent life skills. And one could debate, well, we don't need to know how to chop wood and stack wood and light fires anymore because we have central heating. Is there, how do we bridge that? Because to me, yes, I agree, but I've taken up a practice of chopping wood and learning how to work with it because I had no idea. So here I am as a silly slicker trying to integrate that. I think there's value to having those foundational life skills, and to me that also ties in the conversation of foundational life skills of being your own herbalist, knowing how to work with plants. But most of us have lost that connection.
Sometimes if I'm sitting in a campground and I'm watching a father with his 3 kids over there, and they're going to be camping, tenting for a couple of days, and this guy's getting really frustrated, and I thought, that's the worst attempt at wood chopping I've ever seen. So sometimes I'm on vacation, I don't need to get involved here, I shut up.
Yeah.
But depending on the mood I'm in, I'll go over and kind of go, excuse me, I noticed you're getting frustrated there. For starters, you're using an axe, which is meant to cut trees down, and you should actually you can get away with that, but it's a lot more work to use an axe. You should actually have what's called a maul.
Right.
which has got a wider head, so that splits wood better. But even with the axe, you're trying to hit the wood, aren't you? And he said, well, isn't that the point? No, you have to aim for the bottom of the wood.
Right.
It's like karate,
Oh.
right?
Yeah.
With the bottom of the board. So with every swing, you're thinking of the bottom of the wood.
Right.
So that the inertia behind the axe, when it hits the top of the wood, has a lot more force behind it. Your swing is different, and it's going to go right to the bottom of
Yeah.
the wood, and then it's split. And the guy tries it twice and looks at me and goes, thanks so much. So then he can continue his day and actually split a bunch of wood, right?
Yeah.
But there's little things like that
Yeah.
we either learn through sharing, or we never do learn to do it right, and we just spend our whole life hating chopping wood.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, and that's why spending so much of my life as an instructor, teacher, whatever, I usually get involved.
Yeah. For sure.
I just out of
Yeah, you've been living it. I mean, and that's why Wild Rose College, just as one example, is so great. It's so valuable. It's so essential. And I don't know who said it first, but it was probably Terry Willard, that the earth is growing herbalists, in that sense. Like, this knowledge needs to be known. And
Right.
people are just like, they're getting called to it. Well, I don't know why I want to learn about herbs. Why do I want to take a $20,000 course and come out with this degree? What will I do with it? Does it equal that, monetary kind of reinvestment? There's something deeper there, right? And I think people find a human connection, a human satisfaction that just we're feeling compelled to this path.
That's a big part of why I still like books.
Right.
It's not that I don't use a computer. I'm probably Googling something every day. But what if the power is gone forever? What if we have a great catastrophe and there's no power anymore?
Right.
So the people that Google schmoogle everything are going to be kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Right? So I know I'm doing my part to maintain what's always been known, the oral tradition.
Right.
And you can watch a herb walk online from your living room with your feet up in comfortable slippers. And you don't have to walk around in the forest in the rain with somebody like me.
Yeah.
Or yourself. Or Yarrow. But I don't think you remember things as well.
No.
When you're out there really doing it, there's the touch me, feel me, taste me, smell me part.
Yeah.
That was a big part of, as I mentioned, this ancient archaeological site with this guy, they called him Shanidar, that was buried with the herbs in a perfect half circle around him, and then a bouquet of them all arranged on his chest like a bouquet. Nearly half of them were aromatic.
Right.
So even before speech, if your brother just got ripped open by a tiger and he was bleeding like crazy, and I grabbed something like yarrow or wild sage and crushed it up and put it on the wounds, everybody watching would go, oh, he's a magician. No, but we go gather some of the herbs and crush them, show you the leaves, see, leaves, look, oh, yeah. And then hold some under your nose so you could smell them. Wow. And before speech, we could learn faster with some of the aromatics, right? So some of the plants go back pre-speech.
Right.
But when all you had for remembrance was vision, that's one sense. The more senses you can involve, the better. Can we taste it?
Yeah.
If it's good to taste it. This one's, it's bitter. Yeah, okay, this one, good. So the more senses are involved, the better. And doing live classes is still better that way.
Yeah. And in fact, I wanted to touch upon that because we started the conversation, you talked about your mother talking to the plants, and if the plants never talk back, right, one of you's got to check in somewhere. And, sometimes some people have that experience. You've shared it as well, where you kind of get this auditory, what we interpret as the language, like, oh, pick me, we want to come, that kind of thing. But the language of plants yes, there could be a kind of a spirit element. We're receiving it in our own language. But the plants, there's a great book, Stephen Herod Buhner, The Lost Language of Plants, and he talks about its chemistry. That's how they speak. You know, they speak in aromas, they speak in, you know, this kind of a thing, like taste.
Right.
And that's how we learn. And I love to kind of just go on that thread for a little bit of the idea of, and you had mentioned it, you could be in France, you could be in Africa, you could be anywhere in the world, and you would be able to navigate your way through, you know, the plant kingdom and what's there and what's useful to a certain degree, just through the chemistry. Right? Oh, it's bitter, or it's astringent, and it's using your senses,
Yep.
right, to kind of like, oh, okay, so that gives me clues. Just how, like, you know, right or wrong, you know, Linnaeus is like, well, if it's a cross flower, it's this. Like, this is almost getting more into that DNA, that like the chemistry of the plants of like, okay, well, this one is bitter, and this one is astringent, and this one, you know, has kind of a moistening, mucilaginous type quality, and from those like those clues, you could begin to, not knowing a plant, begin to assess its properties.
What you're saying was, I mean, a good way to do a book on, say, wild plants of Canada. You know, it's a big number I'm going to throw out because some genuses have, like Artemisia in Alberta, I think we have 28 species.
Right.
So when I use the word 1,100 plants in Canada that we have uses for,
Right.
as food or medicine or both, that's a big number.
That's huge.
But when you consider that a lot of the genuses have many species, it gets a lot smaller number, so it's a little more relatable.
Right.
But you could have a book arranged by just chapter 6 is astringents.
Right.
And there might be a herb like wild sage that's certainly astringent, but it's also good for a whole lot of other things. There might be another chapter on parasites. It's in there again.
Mm-hmm.
But that'd be another way of
Right.
categorizing things.
That'd be cool.
You know?
Yeah. Good way of learning.
And astringents are typically bitter.
Right.
Why can I go out in a pasture and pick smudge sage for smudge? Because horses and cows don't want to eat it because it's so bitter.
Right.
So they can clean up everything else in it. So the rancher doesn't mind me going picking the wild sage because he doesn't have anything that's going to eat it, right? So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I believe the bison did eat that, didn't they? I remember Terry once upon a time saying he thought, you know, bison was one of the cleanest meats.
And that's why they didn't have parasites.
Yeah, because they
Yes.
would actually eat.
Correct.
it.
Yeah. I've forgotten about that. Bison saying to bison in bison talk, look at those stupid cows over there. They don't even know what they're missing. You know? Tummy good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me.
There's often that question that comes up in for myself and others that are exploring this plant path, that what indigenous people knew, you know, around the world, and oftentimes, you know, connected, corroborated by other peoples, you know, that science only now or will at some point in the future eventually validate, right? And there's that question, well, how do they know? And I think that's part of the clue, right? Is just understanding chemistry through the senses of like, okay, bitter, astringent, you know, this kind of thing. I think that's part of it, isn't it? Of how they developed. Yeah, less, maybe a bit of trial and error. Okay,
Sure.
You know.
Depending on what I had available, if you got a wasp sting right now, like my first thought is to go find some plantain.
Yeah.
But if I had a few of my oils with me, I'd reach for the basil. Basil's really good to put on a sting too. Mm. And Terry has a story about on one of his treks up the Amazon being, I think it was just an ant, but something had bitten or stung him, and I don't remember the details of the story, but he could have died. Mm-hmm. He had massive swelling, whatever, from this bite, and the local healer that pulled him right out of that used this plant, and when Terry checked it out later, he found out, guess what? It was a type of tropical basil.
Oh, wow.
You know, and so So there's things, and that's where when we get involved in, again, the botany and the chemistry and so forth, we can
Yeah.
use some of that knowledge even when we're traveling.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you had shared as well in previous episodes, you talked about, okay, roots generally are this, aerial parts are generally flowers, that type of thing, how you kind of view and approach.
Leaves are the factory workers, that's where photosynthesis happens, and
Yeah,
without which we wouldn't be here.
yeah,
We need them to manage our atmosphere. So without plants, we wouldn't even be able to breathe. So that's important all over the world. We have to respect them for that. But there's the factory workers, and a lot of chemistry goes on there. But plants are or leaves, I'm sorry, are where the plants breathe,
right,
and they tend to help us breathe.
right. Mm-hmm.
And roots are what hold the plant in the ground in a windstorm or whatever, so it doesn't blow away. And they tend to be grounding.
Mm-hmm.
Probably all of them to a point.
Yeah.
You could probably dig up just about anything and
Right.
hold some clumps of muddy roots in your hand, and it would probably calm you down.
Right.
Um,
Pollen is another like kind of generalization, being kind of the sperm, the reproductive part of it, like extremely nutritive on one level, but also many of them influence our hormonal system, like pine pollen as an example.
Yeah. And at least like working with oils, for example, things that come from seeds and roots, which we think of, seeds and grains and such, we think of as food.
Right.
And their extracts really help digestive problems.
Right.
So I was just mentioning this to someone on an email request the other day about, and it's so funny, it's happening right now, even thinking about this, like Pavlov's dogs. One of the best things I know for, if you've got digestive problems, and a lot of it has to do with you just got this super busy life and you're really busy, you go for lunch at mealtime, you just with co-workers from the office and everything, one of the best things you can have in your purse or whatever is some bergamot essential oil. And when you take a cup, it's, you take a couple drops of bergamot and just do as I would do for if I had a cold with eucalyptus or whatever. Take a couple drops of bergamot and just breathe it deep. And for a couple of reasons, one of them is it has as much linalool acetate as lavender, so it's really calming. So it's going to calm you down a little bit, but it's really citrusy. And just the chemicals involved in those rinds stimulate your salivary glands.
Right.
And when you start salivating because you didn't have any appetite a minute ago, like I have to just keep swallowing because I'm salivating so much. So a lot of this becomes the power of suggestion, I suppose. You know, but this is hilarious.
Yeah.
I don't have any, and it's working anyway.
Well, it kind of speaks to that idea of, plants don't always need to be ingested to get their benefits, right? Especially when you've developed a relationship with them. Like I've heard a herbalist will, call in the spirit of, right? And just energetically they can feel it. Yeah. Or even, Yara Willard, he talks about like drop dosing, right? There's therapeutic dose, there's like kind of a big mega macro dose, hero's dose, but then there also can be that etheric dose that just kind of, I often share this with people out there in the store, they're talking about, why don't we take a tincture?
You wanted to ask me about echinaceas.
Yeah, let's get into that, yeah.
I think it was 9 species that grew in the U.S.
Okay.
And some of them are endangered now or already gone or whatever. There was one that was in the southwest area of the country that only grew there.
Right.
And it was put on the endangered list. But still a mystery to me that in is how so many people are growing echinacea commercially, why it never made it on its own across the 49th parallel.
Right.
There's all those, in the States has all these species, and there they are. But this is an analogy that came from Terry years ago, where Angustifolia is kind of like Mel Gibson. They're all good fighters, but Echinacea Angustifolia is kind of like Mel Gibson in a Road Warrior movie.
Right.
He's like dirty and bang him up and beat the crap out of things, where Purpurea is more like Sean Connery, perhaps. He's a gentleman fighter.
Right, okay, yeah.
And does it with a little more style. So if I was choosing which one to buy to keep around for colds and things, it's always been Angustifolia for me.
Right.
But if you have a really nice flower bed at home and you just want to grow some to feed butterflies and things like that, then Purpurea is a better choice because it likes that rich, loamy soil and lots of moisture. So if you have a flower bed that's going to get watered a lot and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
Purpurea is your bet. And if you have a rock garden or something, then Angustifolia is the one you want to use.
Okay.
But the other thing,
Thinking of a mnemonic there, like the gusto and gustovolia and the purpurea, right?
yeah, even the words, yes, more delicate sounding.
Yeah.
So some years ago, it was funny, it was one of those occasions when just being on the call list, I got a call from one of the newspapers or news stations, I can't even remember which, was calling me because it was all over the news lines that Echinacea doesn't work. There's
Right.
this new study was done that says Echinacea. I mean, come on, Echinacea works. We've got stacks of paper this high on reports, mostly from Germany,
Yeah.
as to how well it works. It's really well documented. And I said, well, they wanted me to go on the 5 o'clock news, like today.
Right.
I think, and I said, well, can you get me a copy of the report? And so they had it couriered over to me immediately. And I don't know why it wouldn't have been emailed or something, you'd think, but anyway. So they had, maybe it was a big thing, a big document, and that's how they had it. It wasn't in electronic form. So they had a courier bring me the report, and I started skipping through it. And the first thing I looked at was, who did this study? And it was done by and for the U.S. military and a large pharmaceutical company.
Right.
Two agencies that I have complete trust in, right? And I looked at the dosage guidelines that they used, and I started laughing.
Right.
And I said, like, how much did this cost? And I could have saved these guys $20,000 in a 5-minute conversation, because what they set up as the dosage,
Right.
it'd be like, it was the equivalent of getting a headache. So you took an aspirin out and licked it and put it back in the drawer. Like, they were so far below. All of this data says this is the recommended dose.
Right.
And they were way below dose, so of course it failed the study.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was just goofy.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
It's amazing.
you know, dosage is always important, but to me, if I'm coming down with a cold that's rapidly onset, I'm not going to take a couple of droppers out of drops out of a dropper bottle. A 60 ml bottle, to me, if something's coming on real hard and fast, is 2 doses.
Right.
I'm going to take half the bottle
Yeah.
in one shot and rinse my mouth with a bit of water or some tea and call it good.
Yeah.
And depending on how I feel in a couple hours, I'm going to finish the bottle. So to me, a 60 ml bottle of tincture is sort of like a fire extinguisher.
Right.
You know, but again, it just depends how fast and how quick. And a lot of people I've talked to that were trying to use herbs or essential oils for colds and things like that and said they didn't work. They didn't use enough, they didn't use it soon enough, or they didn't use it the right way.
Right.
You know, there was no fault of the herbs because we know the herbs work.
Mm-hmm.
But people, like, you got a pneumonia and you were sniffing 3 drops twice a day. I mean, that's not going to hit a pneumonia. You got to go in hard and core with a couple of drops on your hands, deep breathe, what I like to call an airstrike.
Yeah.
So many things in the respiratory system. There's a few things that can come by land or sea, but most things that hit the respiratory system came by air. So to me, the best way to treat them is by air.
Right.
So we take a couple of drops, deep breathe. If you feel the need to cough, great. That's because you've got too much mucus in your lungs and you want to get rid of that mucus. So keep a hanky whatever, napkins close by, because if you're going to be coughing, you're going to get all sorts of... Healthy mucus is crystal clear. If you have a bit of a runny nose and you blow your nose and you can't see anything in the Kleenex, that's okay. That's all right. It's good mucus. But when you start seeing things go white, you're into definite infection going on. If it's yellow, it's indicating heat, and you got to get on it right away. And if you're coughing up chunks of green and brown mucus, that's really old sludge that should have been out of your body weeks ago.
Right.
And you were so full of sludge that's why when you inhaled the same virus or bacteria that was flying around the office, that's why you got sick first, was in you, it found the perfect home.
Right.
So you want to take it really deep, and with things like eucalyptus, for example, I'm switching gears here, but some of them, which are safer to use during pregnancy, for example, and breastfeeding and all of that, don't have any ketones, but ketones they're not to be feared, because things with ketones are some of our best vulneraries, which are things that make wounds heal faster. But when you're inhaling them, they get directly into the bloodstream. So anyway, back to respiratory things. The more the ketones are, the more sludge is going to melt, which is going to stimulate the nerves to tell you to cough.
Right.
So as an expectorant, you want sometimes things that are very bitter or strong.
In fact, a little memory hook for the eucalyptus was globulus. I think about like globs.
Yeah, globs of stuff coming out of your chest.
Yeah.
And radiata sounds almost pretty. It might have reference to the flower parts or something. I'm not even sure.
Yeah.
The way they radiate, I'm not sure. But there's another one called, it's quite interesting how, even though the plants are completely unrelated botanically, when we stack up the lavender oils, the different species, a lot of them are the same as the profile chemically of the eucalyptus family, or genus, sorry.
Yeah.
So there's one lavender called Stochas, and it's often the one you'll buy at Costco or whatever to put on the deck in a pot.
Right.
That one's really high in ketones. I tried it once in my steam room and had bloodshot eyes and a headache for 3 hours, because it's really high in ketones. So you want to watch out for that.
Yeah.
And almost all members of the Labiatae, which is the pea family, all of our common kitchen herbs like basil and so forth are in that family, rosemary. So those are thyme. Did I say oregano already? Those are all in the pea family, where they have a lot of variety in their chemistry, and that's where doctors, like when I started studying oils, I wasn't, here we go with where I'm going to go on Sunday. I started out studying medical reports from France and Germany, from doctors, not aromatherapy flyers.
Right.
So aromatherapy is a really valid thing. It works. And it's been well documented that I could treat you with something below the threshold of you smelling it.
Interesting.
It's such a low dose.
Yeah.
It's going to work even though you can't smell it at all.
Right.
That sounds a little coyote-ish to me.
Yeah.
But
there's something called aroma.
But that's a valid thing. So
Yeah.
aromatherapy is a real valid thing. But most of what I use essential oils for in my career is not aromatherapy. It's actually allopathic medicine. Allo is Latin for against.
Right.
So I want to get the mucus out of your body.
Right.
I'm going to have you smell some globulus. I don't believe that's aromatherapy. That's standard practice medicine.
Right.
And it's dose-based. And you can't, again, back to what I was saying earlier about people not using enough or the right one or fast enough. These are all things that, like, every case is different. And, here we are, we're such complicated beings. Somebody might be ill because of stress, some of it's emotional. What kind of emotional stress? Boy-girl stuff, financial stuff, and how we might treat that with different essential oils or flower essences. That's all different. So we have to, I thought it was interesting, whether this is still true or not, that in Asia, when you're born, your father starts paying your doctor for you, unless you get sick.
Right.
And then doctor doesn't get paid anymore because he hasn't been. So there's this
Yeah.
open going relationship where your physician is taking care of you lifelong.
Yeah.
And emperors and such have even their pee and poo is looked at by their physician every day to track, oh no, too much of that in your diet, now we have to take that away.
Right.
So, or you'll get sick. So it's all quite different. And in Ayurvedic medicine, apparently, the practitioner comes and spends at least a full day staying, sleeping, eating with you and your family to look at interactions with family members and look at the diet.
Right.
And that's where the analysis starts, before you get sick.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So here we do whatever the heck we think we want to, and then expect a physician to fix us
After
real fast.
2 minutes of talking to you.
Yeah. And that's just not even a fair assumption.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons I stand up for standard practice medicine. I feel sorry for them for the most part.
Right.
Because they have so little time. A lot of information is based on, they've got all the scans and everything they can do now, right? Like after my stroke, I had all of these scans done on my brain and whatnot, right? And at one point, I forget which one of the tests it is, but where they glue all the little electrodes to your scalp, and
Right.
then that's all red for a while. And the glue that they use, could I just see that can, please? The can with the glue in it that they're using to glue it says right on it, this should be used in a well-ventilated area with this number of twin canister mask on. And these poor, the practitioners that are doing that, there's enough paper about that particular solvent to go from here back to your car. It's a recipe for MS.
Yeah.
And they're doing that for a living without the proper gear.
Right.
Doing brain scans.
Right. Not to mention what it's going to do to your brain.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And they try and get some of it out when they finish the treatment. But I mean, I had that stuff. I was sitting reading a book a little too close to a lamp, and the extra heat was melting what was still on my scalp and hair, and it was running down into my ears.
Oh no.
And never mind how like that's an intelligent test.
Yeah.
But we have to do that to test your brain. It's almost like if you survive the test, you're okay. I mean, it's some of what we do is just lunacy, I think.
Yeah.
So, there's so many arenas where I have sympathy for them.
Yeah.
Even though apparently we need that.
Well, and it comes back to that point of being our own doctor, being our own herbalist, being our own nutritionist. There's always a time and a place to consulting with an expert, right? Having them come stay with you, but first and foremost, it resides with us, right? We can't afford to pay, somebody to analyze our daily pee and poo. Like that's got to be us.
Migraine headaches, so often caused by food sensitivities.
Right.
And nobody ever heard of that, so they just live with their headaches and take pills. And you say, okay, Marge, go get a little pocketbook, and I want you to start writing down absolutely, or little Billy, Jimmy, any age person, start writing down every single thing you put in your mouth, every glass of juice, every stick of gum, a piece of chocolate, whatever, you had spaghetti and meatballs, just write down absolutely everything, and we start looking for patterns. And you may not see them, but somebody like a naturopath would. I might. But sometimes it's really simple. There's a list of herbs that we call the dirty dozen.
Right.
Or a list of things that are very common in the diet that do that, like dairy products on that list, for example. Sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's hard because it might be tomatoes, but only when they're with green peppers. So you might have some tomato soup or some ketchup, which is silly because it's just red sugar sauce. But anyway, but only with green peppers. So you have a pizza with tomatoes and green peppers together.
Yeah.
And boom, a couple hours later you have this headache. So sometimes it takes a lot of more time and openness to detail, I suppose.
Yeah.
When we look at things like a lot of people are sensitive to tomatoes, and that's too bad. They're so nice, but we're only a few decades, lifetimes away from tomatoes being extremely poisonous.
Right.
The original wild tomatoes were about as big as my little fingernail.
Yeah.
And lethal. It's a nightshade.
Yeah.
So we've hybridized things to a point, but why do we have these sensitivities? Because it's even in our DNA, I suppose, that certain things just shouldn't be eaten too often.
Or what we've done with them. Milk is a great example. We pasteurize it, homogenize it. Yeah. So there can be an issue with what was maybe a great food once upon a time, but how we're accessing it in today's day and age, or glyphosate on Roundup Ready corn, or desiccant sprayed onto grains. That's really what's causing the issue, as an example. Yeah.
And that's to get things. So many people have left the farm to live in a city.
Right.
So we have to get the product from Bolivia to Calgary, and it lives in a warehouse for a while.
Right.
And then it lives in the supermarket for a while, and it's a lot different than walking out in your backyard. And I used to think, why, when I have a 25-foot lot near downtown Calgary, would I bother to grow tomatoes?
Right.
So that I can walk out on my deck on a sunny Sunday morning in my underwear and sit down with a newspaper and pull something off a stem and put it in my mouth.
Yeah.
And the taste is different, and that's why I'm willing to. How much is every square foot of my property worth in that neighborhood?
Right.
But I'm going to give up one to have a little box to grow tomatoes in fact, several.
Yeah.
Because of that simple pleasure.
Yeah, and it's such a defining, quintessential moment. People will remember, picking strawberries with their grandparents, that they grew or something. It's so deep, it's so rich, it's so impactful.
As soon as you said that, I'm flooded with memories of my grandmother's raspberry patch and things like that. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's why you do it. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned about seeds, nuts, seeds, grains, can be beneficial for digestion. They can also cause a lot of trouble, with people's digestion. And this comes back to more kind of just inherent traditional life wisdom, knowledge. Nuts, seeds, grains, they have protective mechanisms because they're the seed, they're the future progenitor of their species.
Those are the grandkids.
Yeah, and
so a lot of plants hide their toxins in seeds or the roots.
Right.
They think you can eat my leaves all you want, but you can't have my seeds because the
Mhm.
seeds is the future.
Right.
And yet, a lot of seeds by design are meant to. Every plant has a way of moving their seeds around because they want to go west, young man. They want to get over the hill, or they want to get to the other side of the valley, or whatever. So we have all of those little, maple trees have those samaras, they're called, the little. How many
helicopter things.
How many elm babies do I pull out of my garden every summer because they've flown in from 5 yards away, kind of thing, right? And they sprout and grow.
Yeah.
Or any fruit, basically. It's so amazing that when you slice an apple open and look in the core, and if it's a real apple, there's seeds in there. And I say that because a lot of the hybrid fruits, like seedless grapes, part of the thing there is that's handy to eat them, but that means that nobody could ever grow some of those grapes. So the company that hybridized them own them.
Yeah, I mean, you think
Own
about
the product, right?
raisins as an example. I mean, we carry, I we don't have it all the time, but we actually carry a seeded raisin. It's called a Manuka raisin, and it's different. I mean, you can't just necessarily throw a bowl in, a handful in your cereal because it's, like you're crunching through grapeseed. It's a different
Right.
experience, but
And a lot of people have dental problems with seeds too.
right.
Like it's really easy to get, apparently strawberries and raspberries are one of the worst to end up with a major infection in your mouth because you just got a couple of seeds from your yogurt and berries
Oh,
up
interesting.
under the gum,
Right.
and then they're stuck there and
Hmm.
start fermenting or whatever.
Yeah.
So the original purpose is you or I or a bear walk up to an apple tree and we're hungry and go, and take the whole apple,
Yeah.
and then the next day you're in a different place 6 miles away
Yeah.
and have a poo, and so the seeds are in a nice little pile of moisture with some fertilizer, and there comes a new apple tree.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them are meant to get around, but others aren't. Like some of our, I'm just trying to think of one of the rose family that's, the seeds are actually poisonous. Anyway, to make it through the digestive tract, back to apples, oh yeah, that's it. I think it's even things like almonds, or sorry, not almonds because we eat those. Peaches or apricots or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's cyanide or something in there.
Yeah.
So, but with apples, there's a fatty acid coating on the seeds, and so unless you literally crush the seeds up in your mouth, they won't be digested.
Right.
So the fatty acid coating protects them from stomach acids, and it's only that coating gets removed by bile. I'm only half remembering this story, but anyway, the seeds make it through your whole digestive tract.
Yeah.
So by design,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can still hatch in the poo. Let's just leave it at that simplistic form.
Yeah.
But
And a lot of humans' cultures figured out, okay, if we can soak, sprout, ferment, roast, it takes care of a lot of those inherent protective mechanisms of the nuts, the seeds, to make them more digestible, make their nutrients available.
Right.
Takes away things like phytic acid. Which, if not dealt with, either, they're going to pass right through you, or worse, they can cause digestive problems by, binding onto minerals,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
I find it fascinating, back to botany and sort of just life on this planet. Before an apple blossom opens on the tree, it's already determined how many to become seeds are inside the ovary.
Wow.
And what we call the core of an apple is what's left of the ovary.
Right.
So before the apple flower even opens, how many seeds are going to end up in the apples was predetermined.
Wow. Yeah.
Just as before a little girl is even born, how many times she's going to ovulate in her lifetime
Yeah.
is predetermined.
Right.
And when you hit puberty, a little bell rings and some voice says, "Well, girlie, it's time to play cards." Tick, 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 tick.
Yeah.
And that's why some women go through menopause sooner than others.
Right.
It was all predetermined before birth, because a hormone drip causes those little seeds to ripen one at a time,
Yeah.
and you only have so many shots. When you really look at the whole reproductive system, it's almost incredible that we even get pregnant ever.
Right.
There's so many things working against you. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't need to go there.
Yeah.
That's another whole class.
Well, here's a trip, because I thought about that reference that you just shared, that these things are predetermined, and I was listening to an interview the other day, and they were talking about atrazine, which is a type of pesticide that they have done all kinds of experiments with, and this one was they put acceptable levels, EPA approved levels, in an environment where there were frogs And so the male frogs, there was a certain percentage, I don't remember all the numbers, turned female.
Oh,
And not only did they turn female, but these females then were able to produce fertile eggs.
wow.
You know, like it kind of, I mean, I know we're different than frogs and different than apples, but you know, it kind of throws that out the window, just like, you know, that nature versus nurture, how things can just flip on a dime. Yeah.
We're getting to some of the disasters that happened with Jurassic Park,
Right. Yeah.
where things they flipped and started reproducing when they weren't supposed to be able to.
And I don't know if I shared this with you, but I'm sure you've come across these kinds of studies, like that frog experiment, whether it's iatrazine or whether it's glyphosate, you know, like all these, what they call xenoestrogens, right? They're
Oh, yeah.
able to influence us, and obviously they're phytoestrogens. But pine, you know, is something that's androgenic. So we know it primarily in the pollen. You know, lots of hormonal influence from things like DHEA and testosterone, and you know, all those different things. Like it's very androgenic, and it's not only in the pollen where it's most concentrated, it's throughout the whole tree, and so the seeds as well as the bark. So I was reading in Stephen Herod-Buhner's book about pine pollen, and that they had observed that downstream of a pine mill for, you know, logging, turning to paper, all that kind of stuff, the waste product from the bark was getting into the water and turning the fish male.
Well,
Which I think is great news. I mean, that's, you know, it's bad in the sense of an isolated incident, but, you know, here's one little beacon of kind of hope, and where we're hearing all this kind of one side of like kind of feminization. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying that, you know, it's being feminized or feminine is definitely not a negative, but in an imbalance.
yeah.
And this is an imbalance here. It's like, okay, let's put those two together, and, you know.
And it's one more thing that it's happening due to our influence from cutting the forest down and turning it all into lumber in the first place and putting those chemicals into the water.
Right.
Where the natural forest, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, like you say, it's the Jurassic Park effect. But
Spooky.
nature is beautiful, you know, deep, complex, and we're here for a journey, aren't we?
Yeah. We keep raping and pillaging. And sometimes, you know, we need to be there. Sometimes they're natural disasters. Like you think about all the love and effort that goes into cleaning up nature after an oil spill.
Right.
You know, that was never meant to happen in nature, but there's lots of toxic things that happen. Like whether a log falls over in the wind and just lays there and rots in the forest, or you cut it down with a chainsaw and burn it in your fireplace, the amount of carbon that's released back into the atmosphere is the same.
Right.
Okay, but it's the only reason we've tipped the scales is because our population continues to rise,
Right.
and that's what throws things.
And one of the greatest sources of carbon capture is what's in the soil, you know, like the mycelium, you know, the fungi.
Oh, right. Yeah.
As an example, the bacteria. And so as we've used a lot of chemicals, industrial agriculture, and removing that, you know, base life form that would be recapturing it, you know, that's causing further problems.
I've watched a few documentaries about what's happening with our permafrost melting.
Right.
And how global warming is melting our permafrost, which is a double whammy because the more that it warms, the more that it melts the permafrost, which makes things worse. And there's other gases
Right.
that are coming out as well, methane and things.
But don't worry, there's a tax for that. You can.
I get credits. It's okay. I get credits. Where's
Yeah.
that form? Yeah.
No, I think it's so funny, just that term, climate change. Well, that's all the climate does. All it does is nothing but change. I mean, I get what they're saying and they're hinting at, but you know, the climate does I mean, you woke up this morning going, okay, what are we getting today, right? Like, it's every moment it is changing, and throughout time and throughout history, all it does is
Well,
change.
we touched on this another time, I think, about what is our whole reason for being here.
Yeah.
It hasn't been that long in a greater picture since the last ice age. I watched it, I just went, oh my gosh, really? I watched a YouTube last week about Yellowstone Park being closed because there's a lot of those things that tourists have been paying to go see for
The geysers.
generations, the geysers and things like that.
Yeah.
That area is such a hotbed. I'm trying to remember, there's one big bowl that used to be a volcano or whatever, and apparently there's a couple that are threatening. There's activity threatening, like they've got all these sensors all over the park, kind of
Right.
like they do on our west coast, as to how quickly or not Victoria is sliding into the ocean,
Right.
because it is.
Yeah.
But it's only that much a year, so
Right.
that's during our lifetime. Why should we care?
Yeah.
But tectonic, I think they're called plates, are going like this.
Yeah.
So that area around Yellowstone is the most active, thermally active area of the world, apparently.
Right.
And the scientists involved are saying it's really close to blowing.
Yeah.
And
That would wipe everything.
if and when it does, depending on the scale of it, we could have as much as 5 feet of ash covering the entire state of Texas.
Right.
And then when all of that gets up into the atmosphere, the conditions it creates are what's going to cause, because a lot of scientists have been predicting, forget global warming, keep your tubes close by, because we're actually
Right.
steering towards another ice age,
Yeah, yeah.
you know?
Yeah, no, there's definitely...
And that could happen almost instantly if Yellowstone blows up.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're gone, in that sense.
So,
yeah, there's
so
that
we're
theory.
extinct, just like the dinosaurs were.
Yeah. There's that idea of the grand solar minimum. That we
Nothing to
should
do
be
with how
into.
many cars we drove or,
Yeah.
you know.
And my friend Dakota Cohen, he talks about, because it's been well documented that there have been these previous great extinctions before. He's like, well, that's case for optimism, because look how well life came back. Like in that sense of the diversity, I have no doubt. Mother Earth will continue, and the life will flourish again. It's just in our frame of reference for time and everything. That, give it a few.
Some other creature that may not look exactly like us might be digging us up.
Right.
Like, what did they do with all these cars back then?
Yeah.
I picked up a hitchhiker one day on my way up to Waskesiu. He was from Germany, I think, and every car that went past him was dragging a trailer or a boat.
Right.
So he just made the assumption that every Canadian had one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we talked about it. I said, no, not really. This is recreation. We come up here to play, and yeah. But a simple observation, this is just what Canadians are born with. A milk bottle in one hand and a cabin at the lake with a motor home and a boat.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how far we've drifted off on that topic now.
Yeah. Well, that's what I love about our conversations. We cover a lot of ground, and we don't know where we're going.
A lot of ground and a lot of air. What else was there anything we were hoping to cover today? I mentioned the botany in a day book. I wanted to do that. I wanted to
great explanation of why Latin. That
why
was
Latin.
awesome.
I can't
We
think.
talk about the echinaceas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to my knowledge, back to echinacea, I don't think there's a huge difference in terms of their effectivity.
Right.
To some degree, I think purpurea is a little more mild.
Mm-hmm.
But that might just be a bias. And again, depending on how quickly something on set, I would always use echinacea along with golden seal.
Right.
Because it's got that, its main influence is on the mucous membranes. And again, that's why we can't use golden seal during pregnancy, because it flushes mucous membranes, and the whole reproductive tract is mucous membrane.
Yeah.
So just like you get more gobs of snot coming out of your body when you've got a cold, then oops, a baby came out, you know, kind of thing. So it could be abortive. Yeah.
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 Cool. Well, should we leave it there today?
I think so.
Yeah, that was a great chat.
Before we put ourselves to sleep.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks for staying awake and listening to us babble.
For sure. Right on. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. See you next week.
Good-o.